Okay, so can everybody see? All right, so can everybody see that and can everybody hear me? Just need a sound check.
Yes, I believe I can. If
Okay.
anybody else wants to.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to everybody for joining us today for this presentation on the AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report. My name is Theresa Lanowitz, and I'm head of Cybersecurity Evangelism with AT&T. And prior to joining AT&T, I was an analyst. I worked for Gartner for a number of years, and I also had my own analyst firm for about 12 years. And I started covering security back in 2012 when I was, or I'm sorry, 2002 when I was at Gartner. So 2002, I saw the need from an application development point of view to secure the applications and started writing about the need for application security. So that was back in 2002. So I've been covering security, looking at security, researching security, working in security since 2002. And today what I want to share with you is the AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report, some of the findings from the report. And this report is our annual big thought leadership research report. And what we do with this report is we really take a forward-looking stance at new technology that's about to come out and have a tremendous impact on the business as well as on the market in general. So this year we wanted to take a look at what was going on with securing the edge. How are people using the edge? And if you think about how cybersecurity risks have evolved, the more democratized computing becomes, the greater the risk. So if you think back to the days of the mainframe, the biggest risk we had was somebody coming into the data center, unplugging something from the wall, spilling coffee on the keyboard, or so on. And then in 1971, that all changed with the advent of the creeper virus. And then compute started to become really democratized. We had PCs. We had PCs now connected through a local area network. The adversary changed. The adversary was the hobbyist hacker. Maybe somebody who was a born student would want to hack into that local area network just to say, aha, I was here, leave their digital signature and go on. Then we move on to the idea of having more compute democratized in our web applications, mobile applications, cloud applications. The attack surface changes, the adversary changes, and the threats change. Those adversaries suddenly become very financially motivated, as we saw last year in 2021 with the spate of ransomware attacks that we saw. We've seen hacktivists take over websites through tremendous DDoS attacks, and we see well-coordinated nation states as well. So now as we move to the edge, where it's no longer about just running those large monolithic back-end applications, but it really is about the customer experience, the user experience, and all about that data and that data that we are consuming and generating, suddenly compute becomes extremely democratized. So that's what we talk about in this AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report. So just to give you some context for this report, it's a global survey that we do every year, 1,520 participants this year around the world, North America, Latin America, EMEA, which includes UK, Ireland, France, and Germany, APAC, which includes India, Australia, Singapore, and South Korea. And we wanted to survey people who were in organizations of 1,000 people or more. And the people we talked to were cybersecurity leaders, director level and above, line of business leaders, director level and above, IT leadership, director level and above. And so one of the things we learned was that the line of business was actually critical in these new technologies for the edge, underpinned by 5G networks, that the line of business was really critical. We learned that the line of business is the organization that's really pushing these new technologies into the market and into organizations. And in this particular report, we surveyed 6 vertical industries: financial services, healthcare, retail, manufacturing, energy and utilities, and US public sector. So that just gives you a little bit about the survey demographics. And so the title of the report, or the subtitle of the report, is Securing the Edge. And the first thing everybody wants to know is, well, what do you mean by the edge? And I think anytime we hear the word edge, we're always skeptical, and we always ask, what does that really mean? And one of the things we discovered from our research is that edge means different things to different people, that the definition for edge is really in flux. And what we found out from our research is that there are essential characteristics of edge, but the definition is really in flux. And if you think about it, every vendor is really positioning that edge definition to their technology stack. And we liken this to where we were probably 10, 12 years ago with cloud, where everything was cloud and there was really no standard definition that everybody was adhering to. But so now getting back to edge, the essential characteristics that we found with edge are that first, it's a distributed model of management, intelligence, and networks. The second characteristic is that the applications, the workloads, the hosting, it's closer to where that data is being consumed and closer to where that data is being generated. Because with edge applications, edge use cases that we see out there, it is really all about that data. So much of edge, as we'll see, is with those IoT devices. Those IoT devices have those headless types of applets, if you will. And in an edge environment, those applets are headless, non-GUI, they're ephemeral, they come together, they join to give us the data that we need, when we need it, where we need it, and for our specific need. And the third characteristic of edge is that it's software defined. So we've been talking about living in a software defined world for quite some time, but now what we're seeing with edge is that everything is certainly software defined. So those are the essential characteristics of edge. So when you think about edge, think about these characteristics, understand what these characteristics mean, and then figure out what you're going to either do with a particular use case, how you want to go about building a particular use case, and so on. But these are the essential characteristics of edge. So when somebody talks about edge, just kind of have a mental checklist and see whether or not it fits those three characteristics. So in the AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report, the key findings, the big three aha moments, if you will, are that first, 75% of the people who took our survey said that they are either fully implementing an edge use case, have partially implemented an edge use case, or are really far down that path of researching an edge use case. So to us, that was a very surprising number, that it was 75% of the people who took the survey said, yes, we're doing something in the edge. Because I think when we think of edge, we think of those common use cases that have been put into the market, things such as autonomous vehicles, self-driving vehicles. And we were really surprised to see that 75% of the people who took our survey said, yes, we're down this path of edge. And I have some sample use cases later on in the presentation that we can talk about, and also broken out by those 6 vertical industries that we surveyed to show you who's really leading in this idea of moving to the edge. The second big key finding that we found here is that as much as we talk about everything moving to the cloud, we still found that we're living in a hybrid world. It's 50-50 between cloud and on-prem. So in looking at where cybersecurity controls are residing, 50-50 split between on-prem and in the cloud. So to us, that was a very eye-opening piece of data that we collected. Because I think that living in a technology company, we think, of course, everything has moved to the cloud. And I think all of the things that we read in the marketplace, everything has moved to the cloud. But we found out in our research that it's still really 50-50 split between on-prem and in the cloud. We also found out that there are new types of security controls that organizations are investigating. They're taking a look at those heritage cybersecurity controls that they have been using and saying, are these controls really the best use of my capital investment, really the best use of the outcome that I'm going to get, or should I be exploring new types of cybersecurity controls? And we found that most people in our survey are saying, yes, we're going to go out and we're going to explore new cybersecurity controls. We're going to do a cost-benefit analysis on the cybersecurity controls that we're already using and see if that makes sense for the edge. The other thing we found out, and this is something that should not really be a surprise, is that 65% of our survey participants are working with a third party to implement those edge use cases. And in our 2021 report, the same report that we did in 2021, we found that 95% of our survey participants said, yes, of course, we can't do this alone. We have to go out and find somebody to help us, some trusted advisor, somebody who has done this in the past, a managed security service provider, a telco, professional services, consulting, and so on. And so that 95% in the 2021 report of people saying we're going to look for help, really we see this year in the data that we collected, and that 65% are saying they're working with a third party. And a lot of this comes down to the complexity that we're all feeling. We know there's a lot of complexity going on in the market, and a lot of these externalities, these internal issues are really impacting our cybersecurity. We have things such as data compliance, data regulation. We have a suddenly remote workforce that really changed everything for every type of business involved, massive business transformation, digital transformation going on in every type of industry, with security really at the core of those digital transformation initiatives. And those organizations that are mature enough in their digital transformation are now moving to digital operations, figuring out how they're going to operationalize those digital transformation initiatives that they put into place over the past couple of years. We have those very determined cyber adversaries, as you all know. So this idea of working with a third party, working with a consultant organization, a professional services organization, a managed security services type of organization, and so on. So this makes perfect sense that people are looking for help because of those big types of issues that are going on. And the complexity is doing nothing but increasing as we democratize our computing. We see more complexity, and organizations are saying that, you know what, fighting cybercrime is really not something that I am very equipped to deal with. I'm going to go get help. So taking a look at those big three aha moments that we had when we got this data back, the first is edge momentum. And as you see here, edge deployments have surprising momentum despite this high concern of perceived risk. And perceived is a very important word there. So organizations are perceiving that as they move to the edge, as they have more edge use cases deployed, there's going to be some amount of risk. So that's the perception of risk. So this is the edge network use cases in production within the next 3 years. And oops, go back. And the way to read this is on the y-axis, we have the different vertical markets that we surveyed: energy, finance, healthcare, manufacturing, US public sector, and retail. And then going across on the x-axis, we have low stage in gray, mid stage in light blue, mature stage in dark blue. Low stages, they're in the ideation phase. They're thinking about edge use cases, edge deployments. They're thinking about it. They're researching it. The mid stages, they're in a proof of concept phase. And the mature stage is they have fully implemented or partially implemented that edge use case at scale. So they know it's going to work in their organization. So these are the types of organizations that are going to have edge network use cases in production in the next 3 years. So the interesting thing here, we take a look at this and we see that in manufacturing, for example, 50% of the survey participants who were identified as manufacturing type of companies, they are in the mature stage. 52% of the US public sector survey respondents are in the mature stage, and 52% of retail respondents are in the mature stage. So manufacturing, US public sector, and retail, they're the 3 verticals that are furthest along in these edge implementations in the mature stage, either fully implemented or partially implemented. They've gone through, they've done the ideation, figured out the proof of concept, and they know they can scale this and they know this will work. So if you really take a look at that and contrast that with what we have seen in the past, we've always thought typically, I think, that finance was always going to lead the charge. They would be way out in front of everybody. And finance is certainly doing a lot. 47% of finance organizations are in that mature stage, but manufacturing, US public sector, and retail are really leading the effort in edge. And if we think about the types of use cases that we're seeing, so manufacturing had one of the biggest implementations in use cases. Manufacturing, they're using Edge for video quality inspection on the assembly line. So as a product is being created on the assembly line, they're using cameras and sensors in order to have that real-time instantaneous feedback. So if there's a defect entered at some point, they can stop the production line and go back to that point of origin of where that defect was inserted and fix the problem. So think about what that does. That means that once a product goes into production, if there's a defect that's found in production, it's less likely that there will be that defect found in production because of the way they're managing their assembly line. So that's one of the biggest Edge use cases that we saw was in manufacturing. Another one was in retail for loss prevention in retail. And again, so manufacturing, 50% saying they're in that mature stage, and retail, 52% saying that they're in that mature stage as well. So this is really interesting, broken down by those different verticals, saying where they are in terms of their Edge use cases within the next 3 years. And this shows really the use cases and the state of adoption. So the top is industrial IoT or IIoT, and we have the convergence of industrial IoT and OT. That's certainly has been a big topic in the past several years, but we now see that that's one of the big use cases for adoption. And we see things such as industry-oriented consumer IoT functions, smart building facilities functions, further on down at 29.9 or about 30%. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the thing that we all think of when we think about Edge, the autonomous vehicle functions, that's only about 20%. So we have 20% of the survey participants told us that yes, autonomous vehicle functions is something that we're going to do. But these others at the top, specifically the convergence of industrial IoT and OT, is at the top. 40% are saying that, yes, the convergence of IT and OT is really important. Enterprise IoT functions for everything in smart cities to remote healthcare clinics to operating rooms and so on. That is a top use case, and we have 39%, so roughly tied with the convergence of IT and OT. So those are the use cases and the state of adoption that we're seeing with these Edge use cases. And so it's great to say, yes, people are going to put these Edge use cases into production. There's going to be a lot of momentum around Edge despite this perceived risk. However, we are, as I mentioned, we are far more democratized. And so what we wanted to find out was how likely organizations thought they would be to suffer a cyber attack. And so you can see this scatter plot, and you can see these plots on this grid, and it's not very scattered at all. They're all condensed in that one area. And so what we asked on this question was, how likely do you think a cyber attack would be on your Edge implementation? And how impactful would it be to your business? So you can see every vertical said, yes, we think the likelihood of a cyber attack is very high. And yes, the impact of the business is quite significant. So if you think about that from a historical point of view, typically organizations would say, oh, not me, I'm not going to be the victim of a cyber attack. And oh, I don't really know what type of impact it's going to have on the business. What we're seeing now is that with Edge, there's this perceived risk that is out there. And every vertical is saying, yes, we think the likelihood of a cyber attack is very high. So there's not one organization or one industry vertical that we surveyed that's saying we don't think that the risk is high. And they all understand the impact to the business. Now, if you take a look at where these where this scatter plot shows the different verticals, you see healthcare, the light orangish reddish color it's in the lower left. And you look at that and you say, well, gee, healthcare doesn't think that the cyber risk is very high. Well, in reality, they do think the risk of an attack is very high, and they do think that the impact to the business would be very high. It's just very, very close to those other verticals. But when we got this data back, we looked at it and we said, why would healthcare say that, they might be a little less concerned about cyber attacks, a little less concerned about the impact to the business? And we looked at when this survey was done. This data was collected in September of 2021, so well into the pandemic. And we looked at what happened over the past 2 years with the pandemic. Healthcare, above all types of industry verticals, had to pivot their business far more quickly to be able to deliver the correct outcome. They started telemedicine, remote healthcare, remote testing sites. And so they knew that they had to get that right from the beginning because it was critical. And also healthcare had been the target of many cyber attacks in the past, even prior to the pandemic. So healthcare has learned over the past couple of years how to really build security into what they're doing. And I should also mention that in addition to this report that I'm talking about today, we've also published a separate report on healthcare. So we took a look at the data that we got back from the healthcare and published a separate report on it. And so that report is available to you as well. I believe the links to all the reports or the PDF to the reports are in the chat. So healthcare is definitely saying, yes, we know that the likelihood of an attack is high and the impact of the business is high, but we're a little bit more mature because we have been dealing with this for so long. We had to pivot very, very quickly during the pandemic. So that's just a little bit about where the different verticals perceive those edge risks. And to me, this next slide that I have, concern over attacks, this is the most interesting slide and the most important piece of data that we have in the entire report. We wanted to find out how likely the compromise is of inside an organization. So 74% of our respondents say that the likelihood of a compromise is very likely. And then we wanted to find out what type of attack, what type of compromise were they really looking at? So if you look on the y-axis, we have the types of attacks or the types of compromise, starting at the top with ransomware, attacks against the user or endpoint devices, sniffing attacks against the RAN, attacks against the server, and so on, all the way down to attacks against Mac. And the gray column, that's the totality. So that's every vertical that we surveyed. That's where their concern is. So it's no surprise here that ransomware is the #1 concern that across the board, all vertical types that we surveyed say, yes, ransomware is the thing that we are worried about the most, whether that ransomware comes through a phishing attack, whether that ransomware comes through some type of compromise to the endpoint and so on. Organizations are worried about ransomware, and that's not a surprise given what happened last year. But what we also see here is that across the top, and I am unable to because my top is cut off. Across the top on the x-axis, you have the different verticals that we surveyed. So healthcare, manufacturing, retail, finance, energy and utilities, US public sector. And then the heat map, the dark blue, shows you where organizations are most concerned. So you see that in the first column, we have 80.5% of that vertical industry is concerned about sniffing attacks against the RAN. The second biggest thing they're concerned about is ransomware. The third biggest thing they're concerned about is attacks against the 5G core network. So this is to me a very, very important set of data because one, organizations always like to compare themselves against their peers. If you're in retail, you want to know what other retail groups are thinking. If you're in finance, you want to know what other finance groups are thinking. So this is a really important bit of data to be able to take back to your organizations and talk about the types of things that you should be concerned about as you move to edge computing. The other thing this does is it allows you to open up the concept and have a discussion about shared responsibility. And when I talk about shared responsibility, if you take a look, we talked at the beginning that compute is becoming more democratized than ever. So this idea of shared responsibility says that for the edge, I'm more than likely going to use a new network, probably a 5G network. And that 5G network offers me lower latency, higher bandwidth, more security than any previous generation of network that is built in. So I'm getting that network from my favorite carrier. So that carrier has the responsibility for that 5G network, for the security of that 5G network. Now, I, as the customer of that network, I'm putting my applications, my data, my endpoints on that network. And I, as the customer of that network, I have to be concerned about securing my applications, my data, my endpoints, and so on. So anything that I am putting on that network, I have to make sure that I'm securing. And then you bring that third pillar in, which is the cloud. And you say, all right, so if I am running on your favorite cloud provider, I still have to ensure the security of my applications, of my data, and of my endpoint. So it's that shared responsibility model, meaning that just because this new 5G network is more secure than any previous generation of network, you have to make sure that anything you're putting on that network is secure. And just because you're running in a public cloud and that public cloud provider will take care of security for the infrastructure of that public cloud, again, you have to make sure that you're securing your applications, your data, your endpoint. So you as the customer of that network, you as the customer of that cloud, you have to make sure that you are taking your responsibility for security as well. So it's that shared responsibility model. And this is this particular slide with this data on it, as I said, is really, really important. And in our 2021 report, we go into a lot of detail on the shared responsibility model. So if you're more interested in talking inside your organization about that shared responsibility model and where your responsibility begins and ends and where the public cloud provider begins and ends and where the carrier begins and ends, take a look at our 2021 report as well. So this particular slide and the concern over the attacks is very, very telling and can be very, very helpful as you start to think about edge, if you're in the ideation phase, or if you're in the proof of concept phase, or if you're in the implementation phase, just understanding where some of those attacks may occur and where your peers are actually thinking about them. The next big aha moment. So at the beginning, I said we had three big aha moments. The first was that edge it is moving ahead. There's great momentum despite the perceived risk. The next is that hybrid is a reality. As I said, it was a 50-50 split. And in terms of the network for the use cases, it's private 5G cellular leading the most common network that organizations are going to implement for their edge. And this is also very telling as well. We wanted to find out where network functions were residing and where cybersecurity controls were residing. And on the far right-hand side, you see those two big blue dots, 51.3% and 51.9%, a statistical tie. We wanted to find out about how our survey participants were combining cybersecurity and network functions and where they were combining them. So 51.3% said they were having combined cybersecurity and network functions in the cloud. So think SASE, Secure Access Service Edge. So 51.3% said, yes, we're in the cloud with this. 51.9% said, yes, we're combining our cybersecurity and network functions, but it's on premises. So think network and some type of security appliance. So this is where organizations are today. So think about where your organization is today and where you want to move to in the future. So you think about things such as SASE, the Secure Access Service Edge, and inside of SASE, thinking about the framework of zero trust, for example. So doing things such as micro-segmentation, doing things such as multi-factor authentication, doing things such as dealing with compliance and so on, and combining those network functions such as SD-WAN with your cybersecurity controls and hosting them, putting them all in the cloud. So we have basically a statistical tie between cybersecurity controls and network functions being hosted in the cloud and being used on-prem. We also had the outliers of our survey respondents telling us that they are using single function cybersecurity functions on-prem, 27.4, so roughly 27%. They had dedicated cybersecurity only functions in the cloud, but they were only focused on cybersecurity in the cloud, not their combined network functions with cybersecurity controls. So that was 38%. And then 39.9, so roughly 40%, said that they had multiple cybersecurity only functions on premises. So that's just an indication of where the market is right now in terms of how we're combining our cybersecurity controls with our network functions and where we're doing it in the cloud as well as on-prem. So the third big aha we found was that there are a lot of legacy controls out there, and there are a lot of new controls out there. And those legacy controls and those new solutions, those new cybersecurity controls, those new solutions are going to coexist. So what we took a look at was preferred cybersecurity controls by network types. And we also took a look at preferred cybersecurity controls by components. So these two images are very similar. So let me go back and talk about the preferred cybersecurity controls by network types. And on the y-axis, you have the network type. So public cellular 5G telco network, private cellular network, and so on. And then across the bottom on the x-axis, you have the cybersecurity control type. So as we can see here, things such as intrusion and threat detection, data leakage and monitoring, device controls, it's across all 6 network types. So these are some of the controls that people are saying, yes, as we bring in these new network types for our edge experience, these are the cybersecurity controls that are going to be very important to us. And I have an infographic that I've given to the Austin OWASP team. They can share it with everybody, that shows a Venn diagram where we have the cybersecurity controls by network types and the cybersecurity controls by device types, where that intersection is. So you can take a look at that and see how that fits within your organization. So these are cybersecurity controls by network types. This is cybersecurity controls by components. So when you look at the components on the y-axis, you have general purpose computers, nothing really earth-shattering there. It's those desktop, those laptops that we've been using for the past 40 plus years. Special purpose location computers, and so on. So those are the types of components. And then across on the y-axis, we have the cybersecurity controls. So interestingly, if you take a look at the cybersecurity controls out to the end, we have patching. And patching is one of those things, I think we all know it's been fairly contentious over the past several decades. Patching is very reactive, it's very manual, it's very time consuming. As we move to the edge, we are expecting and seeking as cybersecurity professionals, we're expecting and seeking more automation. It's not reactive. It has to be something that can happen on its own because the complexity has just swelled in intensity. So things such as patching are not really valued across these cybersecurity controls by components. So it's interesting to see that something that we have relied upon quite heavily, and I'm not saying to not patch, because patching is still something we need to do, but in the future, organizations are saying, you know what, we need more automation for the edge. We need to make sure that we can do things in a more automated, integrated, and orchestrated way, something that is not taking away, that's not relying so much upon human interaction. So this is a really good chart to take a look at and figure out where you are inside of your own organization with your cybersecurity controls and what components you're running those controls on. And this is a really interesting piece of data that we got back. Cybersecurity controls perceived, and perceived is the important word here, is having the highest cost benefit. And again, we look down to the bottom, and patching is 19.5, so 20% negative, and only 7.88% positive, as opposed to something such as intrusion and threat detection with a high positive value. And so we look at that and we say that patching is really something that organizations are going to have a very thorough conversation about, and determine if patching is something that they're necessarily going to put at the forefront of edge as they start to move to the edge. How can they effectively use patching when they move to the edge? We also see here that distributed denial of service, or DDoS, was very low in terms of the positive rate. And the way we interpreted that data for DDoS is that DDoS is just that insurance policy that's running in the background. And the moment you need it, you rely on it and you say DDoS is the most wonderful thing, but it's just kind of running in the background doing its job. So we see that patching is, again, it received one of the biggest negative scores, and definitely one of the lowest positive scores. So patching is something that I think we're going to be exploring and thinking about in the future. So this is very, very encouraging to me. Significant investment of cybersecurity of edge use cases. So the way to read this is the y-axis are the different vertical markets that we surveyed. So healthcare, finance, public sector, retail, energy and utilities, and manufacturing. And then across on the x-axis, we have the dark blue, we have the light blue, dark gray, and light gray. And the dark blue is 21% or more of an investment. Light blue is 11 to 20%. Dark gray is 6 to 10%, and light gray is 1 to 5. So the question we asked here is, how much of your edge project budget are you dedicating to security initially? And this to me was very, very encouraging, because what we saw here is that the sweet spot for every vertical surveyed is in that 11 to 20%. So for example, if we look at healthcare, the top industry vertical there on the y-axis, 44% of our healthcare respondents said they are investing somewhere between 11 to 21% of their edge project budget on security. So why is this really encouraging, and why am I so excited about it? This says that security is now reached the mainstream. It's not something organizations are going to say, yes, let's go ahead and implement this edge use case, or this edge type of application or type of product that we are going to use, and we'll figure out security later. Security is part of the project from the beginning. So that means that security is integrated. It's not viewed as an afterthought. It's not viewed as a bolt-on. So security is architected in from the beginning, which is really encouraging. Even if we think about our web mobile applications from the past decade or so, security was never something that was thought of at the beginning. The other thing that this data really tells us, and the way we can interpret this, is this means that all of those silos that we have built up inside of our organizations over the past decades, probably the past 50 plus years, the operations team, the development team, the QA team, all of those silos, we're starting to see the eradication of those silos. Because if we're saying that healthcare, for example, they're saying we're going, 44% of them are saying we're investing somewhere between 11 to 20% of our overall project budget on security. That's not just a security group sitting there in and of itself in an isolated silo or on an isolated island. That security group is working collaboratively with the development team, with the operations team, with the line of business, building security requirements in from the beginning. So it's that idea of leading with security first mindset and tying objectives, business outcomes to security, making sure that everyone understands the importance of security. So this is a very encouraging sign in that security is something that is front and center of these edge types of applications, these edge types of use cases that people are bringing, the people are putting out there. And I'd encourage you to spend, take a look at where your industry vertical is, spend a little bit of time with this, figure out where you are on your edge journey. Are you in that ideation phase, the proof of concept phase, or the implementation phase? And figure out how much of your budget you're actually allocating to security. And if you are getting pushback in your organization, you can use this to help justify the investment in security that you believe is necessary for the success of your project. So use a lot of this data to help justify your position on security as you move to the edge. So this to me was a very, very critical piece of data that we found, and a very important piece of data because it does point to the fact that we're leading with a security first mindset. Security is not an afterthought, and we are really starting to see some of the eradication of those silos that we have built up over the past several decades. So what do we think about edge? Securing the edge is definitely a team effort. We're seeing those silos really erode and really being more collaborative across the organization. There's a strong momentum for edge despite that perceived risk. Organizations understand the business risk of a cyber attack, and they understand the very real threat of a cyber attack. And edge is moving beyond those big monolithic applications to really say that we are putting our workloads, everything closer to where that data is being created and consumed. So we have to worry about the protection of that data. Figure out the types of cybersecurity controls that you want to use as you move to the edge. Which of those heritage controls are you going to bring along? And which of those heritage controls are you saying, you know what, I'm just not going to use this as I move to the edge? Maybe bring in new controls. Figure out whether you're going to have your security controls and your network functions on-prem or in the cloud. Think about the convergence of those network controls and those security controls. And edge is emerging. So, as we think about edge, think about the different types of use cases. Read our report to understand some of the most common use cases that we have there. I mentioned some of them: manufacturing, the video quality inspection, loss prevention in retail, remote telehealth in healthcare, concierge services in financial services, public safety for US public sector. So there are all these use cases that are out there today that organizations are seeing tremendous benefit from. So figure out where you are on that edge journey. And the last thing I would leave you with is that cybersecurity is a journey. It's not a destination. Look for help from that trusted advisor. So thanks very much. And do we open it for questions now, or?
Yes, we can. I see we have a few in the chat, actually, if you want to look at that. Bill Kleinbecker seems to be asking most of them. So if you actually just wants to ask questions in general, that might not be a bad thing. You with us, Bill? Sorry, I don't see the.
I've got one to start with while we're waiting for Bill to get off mute. There's two different kinds of implementation on 5G. You've got your standalone and you've got your non-standalone. And my understanding is that most of the speed benefit comes when you get to a standalone implementation. And currently, most carriers are not there. They're building on 4G.
Yeah, so if you take a look back, let me go back to some of the previous slide. One of the things we know about Edge is that it's evolving. So what you implement in your Edge deployment today, you may say, you know what, standards have evolved, things have changed, I'm going to go back and do some re-architecting. And that, I think, is one of the things that happens with every type of new technology. So the network types for the top use cases, it's private 5G cellular. That's where we are today. And as I said, as those standards change, as new as new standards, compliance, and so on emerge, there may be some re-architecting of these edge use cases.
Thank you. One more thing, if nobody else has a question. Zero trust, basically authenticating every action by a user or a system, is kind of one of the hottest buzzwords going on right now. How do you see that playing out in the edge arena?
Zero trust, definitely, as you said, it's one of the hottest buzzwords, but it's a reality. So zero trust, as you said, trusting nothing and trusting no thing, and no thing is important. So you're trusting no person, you're trusting no thing, meaning an IoT device, and you're verifying every body, every person, and everything. Because it used to be that if you're in a hub and spoke network, for example, you know, or you say you know that the people who are inside there are verifiable and should be trusted. That's all gone by the wayside with new networking, with the way we're all working. So you have, with the onset of the pandemic, zero trust really, really took off in popularity because we were all working someplace differently. We weren't inside the four walls of our office on that hub and spoke network. So zero trust is definitely going to continue to be very important. One of the things we found in our 2021 research was that 94% of the people who took our survey said they were on that zero trust journey of really researching zero trust or down the path of implementing those zero trust capabilities. And I think it's important to note here that zero trust, it's not a product. You can't go buy from your favorite vendor a zero trust product and say, I'm zero trust certified, I'm good. It's one of those evolutionary types of things. It is certainly a mindset and a framework to aspire to. So It's about making sure that, it's definitely a process. Yeah, it's about making sure that you're protecting your users, you're protecting your data, you're protecting your applications, and certainly you're protecting your infrastructure. So it is really taking a look and protecting all of those things, your users, your data, your applications, your infrastructure.
Thank you.
Hey, Bill, do you have questions? I mean, you had a bunch in the chat.
Yeah, I did a lot of that as stream of thought, so it's hard to collect them. But anyway, I'll just start with, I think, the first one I put in there, and that has to do with I am reading that there's going to be a new architecture to address things. One most particular thing is privacy, and it's called Metaverse. And I'm wondering who's looking at the impact. There's a large price tag, I think, for both zero trust and this kind of edge computing and the and metaverse. I have to stumble over that because everybody laughs at it and says it's not been defined, but the stuff I'm reading now is this one of using the network to say have the recording. So if someone does do a ransomware attack, the ransomware is backed up and quickly switched back over to operations, because it's very expensive, as we learned from the petroleum ransomware a couple of years or so ago. So we
Yeah,
got
so
the network guys. The network guys are working in your area and all that. But what I get is it's the Googles and the cloud guys that are working on other security issues that metaverse is to attack.
yeah, and I think we all know security is such a broad term, a broad world, that we will have new types of areas to defend, to protect. We have to worry about the attack surface. We have to worry about the protection surface. What do we want to protect versus what do we think the likelihood of being attacked is? And so I think that we'll see, security, as I said, it's a journey, it's not a destination. We'll see different types of practices, policies, procedures come out. We'll see different, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when we were first moving to web applications, could we have thought about what we need to do to protect the edge, the things we're concerned about now? We just keep seeing more and more democratization of computing, and the more we have a democratization of computing, the more we need to be able to protect the users, the data, the applications, and the infrastructure. So I think it's just a continuum that you'll see.
One of the things I noticed in the sectors, the verticals you were talking about, that you were saying the energy and a few of the others that were higher up than, say, retail and finance, are those because they're primarily looking at IoT implementations and other things like that, the use cases they're focusing on?
Yeah, it could be. And I think that's a really, really good point. So we have energy and utilities here on this slide that I'm showing that 40% of them are in the mature stage, but we have manufacturing in the mature stage, and that is because the convergence of IT and OT. We have US public sector, 52% of them are in the mature stage, and that is a lot of and I should be clear, when we say US public sector here, we surveyed state and local governments and higher education, so SLED, if you will, state and local government and education. We did not do K through 12. We surveyed higher ed, but they're just in that phase where they're using technology to really supplement what they're doing. And we also have retail here. So retail has been so dramatically impacted even before the pandemic. And the pandemic continued to cause retail to shift. So those types of vertical markets that have been tremendously impacted by technology, look at retail and the way retail has morphed over the past 15, 20 years or so. And then with the pandemic, how retail continued to shift dramatically. Those are the top three in terms of where they are in the mature stage, the top three from our research: manufacturing, US public sector, and retail.
But you're looking at those primarily as a internal, not business, maybe business to business, but not really a lot of business to consumer type of edge use cases. Because I didn't hear many of those.
Yeah, I mean, retail, I think we do see some consumer to edge or B2C types of uses for edge in retail. Manufacturing, probably not so much. It's more B2B, but consumer or retail, definitely B2C.
Okay.
And the US public sector will see it in our state and local governments and higher ed as well. So if you read the report, there are a lot of use cases out there for US public sector that involves the constituents in those state and local governments.
Interesting. I'll look into that. curious. Well, I'm curious what the use cases were for those, because most of the ones you were talking are IoT. So it's like, it kind of makes sense, but these other ones is like, how's the edge kind of play besides just cloud, the old cloud concept in general? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so for US public sector, for example, one of the top use cases was gunshot detection. And there's a lot of human interaction with that as well. So for example, if the police, the local police are picking up a loud noise near a campus, is it a gunshot or is it a loud noise from a party? So there's a lot of human intervention with those edge use cases as well. U.S. public sector, where we also looked at some of the big use cases are city safety. So things such as traffic safety, traffic lights, parking availability. You go into a city and you want to find a parking space, and we've all seen this. The parking garages light up with there are 15 spots available on the third level of the parking garage, but the second level is full and the first level is full. So make your way to the third level, and those parking spots are decremented very quickly. So U.S. public sector, those are the types of use cases that we are seeing. A lot of traffic safety, a lot of public safety in the U.S. public sector, specifically at the state, local level, and higher ed.
You could cripple a city with these kinds of decisions being made at the edge, the smart city, and you won't have the people maybe to figure it all out. It's not that they're at one company. One's the police force, the parking garage vendor, that kind of thing.
And I think that's one of the things we're seeing too, is a lot of the collaboration and cooperation. You use the example of a parking garage. The parking garage may or may not be owned by the city. It may be owned by an independent company. So there's that collaboration with the local government. So there's a lot more collaboration. As I mentioned, the collaboration that we're seeing because of the investment in security, the eradication of silos inside of our own businesses, the eradication of that. The developers are here, the ops team is here, the cyber team is here. Those eradication of silos inside of our own businesses are breaking down, but we're also seeing far more collaboration, I think, in a lot of those use cases, specifically around the U.S. public sector.
Right. If they didn't get the right tools or the right people, they're the chink in the armor.
Anyone else have any other questions for Theresa? I mean, we're coming to the top of the hour here. I don't want to run anybody off yet early if necessary. If not, going once, going twice. Okay. Thank you very much, Theresa. This has been great stuff. I'm really interested to see the reports themselves, and if you can send me some of the information about the healthcare and the retail ones that you said, I'll try to get those attached up to the video when it goes up there.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. This has been great. I attended LastCon, I guess 2019, probably the last time we had it in person, and it was a great event. So thank you for everything you do for the cybersecurity community in Austin.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Theresa.
Theresa. Thanks very much
Thank
for giving the talk. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks.
Bye, y'all.